First things first, hi everybody, and my name is Niv. I'm going to be moderating this panel titled Complicating Textual Representations of Girls at Play. Uh, just some key points. I'm going to introduce our speakers, their name and bio, and also this as an FYI with like every other panel as well. This is being recorded, and if we're going to first go through like say more. We're just going to go through the presentations, and then there's a Q&A right at the end where you can drop your questions in the chat if you prefer. I'll keep an eye on that. And just to presenters as well, I'll DM you the 5-minute mark, but we should be good to go. And sorry, I'm just also going over the little notes that I have to. Yeah, that's about it actually. I'm just going to introduce all of our speakers. We have 4 today. We have Amanda Greer, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto Cinema Studies Institute. We have Sienna Jackson, who is a doctoral candidate in classical studies at the University of Pennsylvania. And Ayantika Nath is a PhD student in English literature at the University of Bristol. And Shauna Pomerantz is a professor in the Department of Child and Youth Studies at Brock University, Canada. And I'm going to now hand over to Amanda first. And feel free to start whenever.
Oh, thank you.
Also, there's more, sorry, I'm so sorry, I completely forgot the point, but like there's more information on of our participants as well in like the larger program, which I'm sure everyone's seen that's been said earlier. Okay, good to go.
Thanks, Niv. And while I get set up, I just want to thank the conference organizers for inviting us all here today. Thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to this. This is a new project. It's going to be a postdoctoral fellowship project I'm working on in earnest in the fall, but this is my first kind of stab at it. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts. And with that, I'll start my timer. All right. Carla Simone's autobiographical debut feature, Summer 1993, opens in a moment of childhood play. The camera rests behind a small, curly-haired girl wearing a sundress. While she is in focus, several other children are blurred out, occupying a hazy background. Red light, green light, we hear as another child leads the classic schoolyard game. The girl rushes forward and throws her hands up when the child yells, red light. Frozen, she waits her fate in the game. The over-the-shoulder shot, coupled with our low level, positions us with the children. This is not a film about adult perspective. The shot soundscape is permeated with fireworks, indicating a summer celebration. It is a time of play. This moment of play is interrupted when the caller in the game comes up to this frozen little girl and attempts to get her to unfreeze by asking, why aren't you crying? His strange question punctures the street festival scene. Why would he ask this of her? Why should or must she cry in this moment of innocent play? We cut to an image of fireworks lighting up the night sky. Then we finally get a reverse shot to show us who we've been aligned with, a little girl whose head tilts to the sky, sparkling with pyrotechnics. She's not crying, but nor is she smiling in the way kids are expected to smile when looking at a colorful spectacle. Her face is impassive, her glassy eyes reflecting the fireworks' luminescence. The boy's opening question thus continues to echo. Why aren't you crying? Why is crying expected of her? Why in this moment of ordinary childhood joy and play? We soon find out that this little girl is 6-year-old Frida. Her parents have both died from AIDS, and she is being taken to live on a farm with her aunt Marga, her uncle Esteva, and her younger cousin Anna. She has much to cry about, and yet she doesn't. Instead, she plays. This opening scene thus establishes a central tension in summer 1993 between play and grief. In this paper, I'll argue that play and grief are methodically inverted in the film. Frida is shown to play at times when she's expected to display legible sadness and to puncture times of play with her poorly timed grief. Due to her inability to properly exhibit grief as a sacred and ritualized expression of legible sadness, Frida is read as an unfeeling child by the adults around her. Drawing from philosopher Giorgio Agamben's writings on profanation and Eugenie Brinkema's writings on cinematic grief, I will argue that Frida profanes grief by transforming it into play, a form of play that allows her to visually recapture her lost mother by reconstituting her as image. Her acts of profanation thus shatter adult expectations around grieving as ritualized mourning, exploring girlhood's inscrutability. Summer 1993 is part of a larger corpus of strange quiet girl films I'm analyzing for a project tentatively titled A Strange Quiet World, Antisocial Aesthetics in Contemporary Girlhood Cinemas. These films, which include The Fits, Alba, I Am Not a Witch, Petite Maman, The Quiet Girl, and Scrapper oppose the trend in contemporary feminist theory and girlhood studies that risks viewing solely outspoken, extroverted, unruly girls as transgressive feminists, again falling into a potentially simple equation wherein introverted behaviors are conflated with enforced silences. However, the quiet girl is adamantly not silent. She exists between loud and silent, breaking apart this binary through her critiques of the adult world and her creation of alternative cinematic worlds that can better sustain her. These girls thus enact a politics of refusal in their efforts to imagine alternative ways of being. As Bonnie Honig writes of her feminist politics of refusal, even when refusal seems to reject the world, it betrays a deep attachment to it. If not to the world as it is, then surely to a more just world that is not yet. These quiet girls do not simply reject the world, but use play to construct alternative worlds that can better sustain them. Summer 1993 formally instantiates strange girlhood refusal through its neo-realist techniques, such as long takes and improvisatory performances. As I will show, these techniques allow for grief and play to coexist in a single shot, a single frame. This paper ultimately argues that Frida's strange girlhood is bound up in her strange grief, poorly timed, awkward, and playful. Her play of grief and grief-puncturing play both puncture adult expectations of normativity, constituting a politics of quiet refusal. My paper will replicate the film's mirrored structure, beginning with an exploration of Frida's playful grief before moving toward her grief within play. I'll closely read two significant scenes for their formal politics of strange quiet girlhood and resistant world building. Together, we'll think about how the mundanity of both play and grief is transformed into a striking exploration of the claustrophobic expectations of emotional legibility imposed onto young girls. Frida in summer 1993 must take on a challenge most people could never imagine, attempt to integrate into a new family after losing both her parents. The film, as shown in the opening scene, takes on Frida's perspective. The camera is low to the ground at a child's height. We gain information in the film from overhearing adults whispering about Frida's inappropriate grief at the corners of the frame. Adults frequently talk over and above Frida. We, the spectators, feel the condescension. Additionally, the cinematic frame is often cut off, fragmented, taking on girlhood's partial perspective. However, this limited perspective is not used to suggest that Frida is unaware of what's going on. Rather, we come to understand that the adults around her have cut themselves off from her while continuing to blame her for her illegible grief. Later in the film, Frida plays an unkind prank on her cousin Anna, which leads to an off-screen injury for Anna and frustration toward Frida. Frida overhears her aunt Marga and uncle Esteva arguing about her. While Esteva defends Frida's actions as, quote, just playing, Marga argues that it wasn't play, accusing Frida of having no morals. During this conversation, we are outside the farmhouse with Frida, who, alone in the darkness, softly pedals her bike. To this point, we understand that Marga, though sympathetic toward Frida's trauma, is frustrated that she seems so unaffected. Esteva, on the other hand, only ever reduces Frida's actions to a simple understanding of play as childish foolishness. They dance around the film's central question and its inverse. Why aren't you crying, and why must she cry? What both Marga and Esteva miss here is that Frida is using play to work through her own grief, resisting her aunt and uncle's desires that she be either a legibly sad, grieving girl who can be easily sympathized with, or a playful, cute kid who can be easily adored. Instead, Frida is a strange girl, at times unlikable and always unreadable to the adults around her. However, through Simone's construction of girlhood perspective, we are granted access to her unseen activities, namely her playful grief. We see many moments of play throughout the film, capturing the languid, mundane summer days of childhood. Frida and Anna learn a dance, go swimming, pick vegetables, and make fake phone calls. I want to focus now, however, on a central tableau of play where Frida play acts as an older woman. The scene opens with some jazzy music playing from an off-screen speaker. The camera begins at Frida's feet and tracks up her frame to reveal that she's very clumsily applying clownish makeup to her face, big red circles of blush and giant patches of green eyeshadow. Frida smushes the makeup into her skin, making a joyful mess. Later in the sequence, we see Frida, now play acting as an older woman, lounging on a beach chair. Anna sits next to her. There are several dolls scattered around. This is then a tableau of play, a tableau of girlhood, but also, as we will see, a tableau of grief. Anna play acts as a daughter, asking, "Mom, will you play with me?" Frida playfully responds, "I'm really tired." She holds a fake cigarette in one hand and is now wearing outlandish sunglasses. "I need to rest, sweetheart," she goes on to say. "My whole body is sore." This line is never explicated. We receive no narrative information about why this imagined person is sore. The camera instead continues to simply observe the girls as they play from several feet away, allowing the scene to, so to speak, play out. Frida urges Anna to ask her again. She complies. "Mommy, do you want to play with me?" "Be a good girl. Let me rest," Frida responds, looking away. Anna asks a third time. This time, Frida leans toward her and says, "Darling, I love you so much, so very much, that I can never say no to you." This scene thus reveals the layers of Frida's playing. What first seems to be a caricature of a, quote, bad mother, wearing too much makeup, smoking in bed, refusing to play with her child, becomes an ambivalent tableau of a loved mother lost. Frida, it is implied, is acting as her mother. Frida's sore body perhaps refers to her mother's battle with AIDS, and her declaration of how much she loves her imagined daughter could reflect past conversations. Frida thus allows herself to reimagine her mother, to reconnect with her through play. As Eugenie Brinkema writes of grief, quote, death deprives one of the vision of the other who is lost. New eyes seek and find only the presence of absence. She goes on to describe the experience of grief as an experience of not seeing. Eyes seek a being, but they do not see, for being is no longer there to be seen. We can think back to summer 1993's opening scene with Frida staring glassy-eyed at the fireworks. Why aren't you crying? Her eyes search for a being that is no longer there. They reflect the fireworks' light, but none of her feelings. Her grief is inscrutable. In this play acting sequence, though, we see Frida attempt to reimagine her mother by becoming her mother. Thus, the loss of vision here, the inability to see the loved one, is negotiated through play. Frida is allowed the privacy of her grief through cinematic form's emphasis on distance and the long take. She is allowed to unfold her play in front of the camera without the intrusion of cuts. Additionally, through her acts of play, she is permitted to preserve a memory of her mother that is complicated, but worthy of grief, a different interpretation than the one we see throughout the film. Indeed, Frida's mother is often described as foolish and shameful because of her disease. The source of her disease is never discussed. The point is that she has died and her daughter continues to love her. Frida's tableau of play then pushes against and through grief's loss of the vision of the other by making visible Frida's mother and the love she provided. It also works against her new family's view of her mother as unworthy of grief, rejecting the idea that some people are more worthy of grieving than others. Frida's play thus poses Judith Butler's question to the adults around her: what makes for a grievable life? Her playful grief profanes the sacredness of grievability itself. As philosopher Giorgio Agamben writes, play facilitates the profanation of the sacred. He cites children as key profaners, as they see the sacred's rituals as no more than material for games. He writes, quote, in fact, the profanation of play does not solely concern the religious sphere. Children who play with whatever old thing falls into their hands make toys out of things that also belong to the spheres of economics, war, law, and other activities that we are used to thinking of as serious. This, however, does not mean neglect. No kind of attention can compare to that of a child at play, but a new dimension of use, which children and philosophers give to humanity. Here, Agamben sees in children an ability to use play to open oppressive objects and institutions to new, potentially joyful uses. Thus, quote, to return to play its purely profane vocation is a political task. Frida's play is an act of profanation and as such is political. She profanes the categories of the grievable and the ungrievable, and she profanes the sacredness of grief as tied up in rituals of legible mourning and sadness. Instead, she play acts taking joy in embodying her lost mother through her makeup, her pretend chain smoking, and of course, a declaration of love. Play itself is an act of love here, camouflaged by the mundanity of a young girl's summer imaginings. Summer 1993 ends with an inversion of this playful grief. The final scene of the film instead depicts grief as puncturing innocent moments of play. The scene takes place on the last night of summer. Anna and Frida are to attend school in the morning. Esteva is getting the girls ready for bed, but they won't stop jumping on the mattress. Esteva joins in the play while pretending to be annoyed at their antics. So I'm going to play the final scene now to give you a sense of its form, especially its duration and its framing.
Che feo. Farò male.
Digo, Mico, digo, Mataca. Tóncatico. Lagi tak mencari. You.
¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué pasa? Estoy mal. ¿Qué pasa?
In this final sequence, which constitutes one long take, we see again an improvisatory moment of extended play. However, the long take and mobile framing allow us to track Frida as her emotions shift from playful joy to racking sobs. When Marga rushes over to ask what's wrong, she can only respond with, "I don't know." This film thus ends with this family seated in a tableau, pressed down by the weight of Frida's grief, which has emerged to puncture an otherwise happy scene. Brinkema argues that grief is formally instantiated in cinema through the tableau, which she notes, quote, organizes the image around the heaviness of grief. Here, this family is literally pressed onto the mattress by Frida's heavy grief. Grief emerges surprisingly, too, amid play. In this scene, Frida's awkwardly timed grief reflects on the family tableau's formation. Here, Frida is finally accepted, integrated into the family structure, sharing in its joy. However, the creation of this new family necessitates a loss of the old. In this scene of play, there is no play-acted version of Frida's mother. She is lost forever here from sight. Perhaps this is what causes Frida's grief to finally emerge as crying. The family tableau here depicts the weightiness of grief that Brinkema describes, yes, but it also reflects on the constitution of family itself. To create a new family is necessarily to drift away from a past family, a life transition that always contains something of grief in it. The formal device of the long take emerges here too to demonstrate the ongoingness of grief, the heaviness of its duration. While the previous play acting scene deploys the long take to demonstrate play's reliance on the spontaneous, it is used here to stress grief's inconvenient duration. Reading is further supported by Simone's moving dedication, which ends the film, "To My Mom, Neus." Over this title card, we hear Frida's continued sobbing. Her grief does not disappear, but persists, saturating the film's form, even and especially when vision is lost, consumed by this black screen. Grief's troubled vision continues on. By embedding play within grief and grief within play, Summer 1993 offers a structural exploration of girlhood's potential to profane the sacred, to overturn categories of legibility and illegibility, grievable and ungrievable. As small child, Frida cannot remake her world. Instead, she uses play to imagine a more just world that is not yet, where her mother is grieved. Her inconvenient grief in the final scene further disrupts expectations, highlighting that gaining a new family does not efface or resolve grief, that it remains inconveniently open-ended. Summer 1993 ultimately suggests that play and grief are not opposed in Girlhood, but complexly intertwined. Their frequent inversions throughout the film are in themselves an act of formal play that is ongoing and often inscrutable. As Frida says in the film's final scene when asked what's wrong, "I don't know." I am reminded of Butler's description of grief. One is exhausted, but does not know why. Strange, quiet Girlhood's intertwining of grief and play thus demonstrate that there is no answer to, or indeed a need to answer the question, why aren't you crying? Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Can pass on to Siana now.
Awesome, thank you. So in true traditionalist classicist fashion, I came with a handout that I believe someone will be able to share on my behalf. Thank you. And with that, I will share my screen. Okay. So today I'll be speaking on Girl Space, Girl Toy, Girl Speak, Persephone's Crocus and Interrupted Girlhood in the Homeric Hymn to Demeter, which is abbreviated HH2D. So as a content warning, the literary subject from the ancient Greek myth that I'll be discussing involves the interfamilial rape abduction of a girl. So what is the Homeric hymn to Demeter? It is the second in a collection of 33 ancient Greek hymns and an epigram to various individual deities of the ancient Greek pantheon, all written in the Archaic period, presumably the late 7th century, early 6th century BC. Each of the hymns praise a particular deity, including a mythological story related to their deeds and an etiological story to explain the establishment of their cults and sanctuaries. Turning to our hymn, Demeter is the goddess of agriculture and the harvest. The hymn highlights the story of her travel across the earth and divine realms, establishing the seasons and her attribute of motherhood. The main story involves her daughter with the god Zeus, Persephone, a divine princess who's raped by Hades, frames the entire hymn. Persephone's relationship to girlhood appears in the story by her rushed coming of age and forced marriage, as shall be discussed, but also by her name Kore, which is also the Greek word for girl. So again, the hymn is structured so that Persephone's abduction story is the frame of its main contents. It begins with a narration of Persephone's abduction by Hades before turning to the long central story of Demeter's journey to find her daughter and her encounters with the people of Eleusis, where Demeter's cult was established. Once Persephone is found, the story of her abduction is repeated before the conclusion of the hymn, where Persephone and Demeter receive honors. The hymn structure affects our focus today in the change of narrator between the two frame stories. The first time Persephone's story is told is stated by an adult narrator, arguably male, though some scholars say that the cultic performance tradition might have called for a woman narrator. And the second time Persephone herself tells her own story. This paper explains how Persephone's abduction experience in the meadow suggests that girl play and girl pleasure are circumscribed by constructions of adult male authority to interrupt girlhoods for their own gratification, while girls themselves recognize play as a space of their own autonomy and fulfillment. The Homeric hymn to Demeter lands its audience directly into a scenario of girl space, girl speak, and girl toys in the opening narration. The hymn zooms into an idyllic scene in the aesthetically pleasing locale of the flower-filled meadow. The narration then pans over and focuses on Persephone, who has discovered a particularly and unusually beautiful flower, a narcissus that was made to appear like a crocus, the latter being a girl and puberty rite associated flower in ancient Greece. Persephone's interaction with the flower, unbeknownst to her, a manufactured trick set up by her father Zeus and Uncle Hades with the cooperation or perhaps utility of the earth goddess Gaia, stands out because Persephone, a child figure, joyfully recognizes the natural thing as something she can objectify and play with for pleasure. The narrator tells us that she sees the flower as a pretty toy, kalon atherma in Greek, and exerts her manipular power over it by plucking it up, labain. By taking the toy, however, the girl unleashes Hades' trick. The ground opens and she is forcibly snatched from girl space into womanhood to be the underworld god's queen and consort. Persephone cries and laments, but no direct speech or reported speech is provided by the adult narrator. Playthings or toys mark the separation of various zones in the Homeric hymn, the realms of girlhood and of adulthood, and the act of play, an act of fun discovery and of a child's self-exertion in the world around her, is what moves the girl figure from one zone to the next. Using theories on play and girlhood studies approaches to understanding child space, I posit that Persephone's play with the crocus in the meadow before her raptus by Hades represents how girl space is both constructed and interrupted by the adult male sphere for its own purposes, namely for the sexualization of girls by abruptly pulling them into bond-forming marriage. And by examining the speeches of both the overarching adult narrator and of Persephone, I mark narratological instances of accusatory adult speech toward child figures and of girl autonomy. So with that, I begin with girl space, the meadow. The meadow is traditionally associated with girls and young women in ancient Greek literature. Normally, the girl figure in this tropic space is shown in the meadow before she is abducted by and or married to a man. The quintessential example of this archetype is Persephone herself, though others appear in the tradition. Iphigenia, for instance, is a Mycenaean princess whom her father Agamemnon was ordered to sacrifice to the goddess Artemis so that favorable winds would release him and his troops to sail to Troy and to fight the Trojan War. As Helena P. Foley notes, this sacrificial death takes place in a meadow sacred to Artemis. Rather than a safe space of recreation or play for girls, the site is perverted by the adult male whose actions necessitate her death. Another girl figure whose story is set in a meadow is the Argive princess Io. Io was being watched by the god Zeus as she was walking homeward in the meadow. Aroused, the god seizes Io and forces himself on her before turning her into a young cow to stay the jealousy of his wife Hera in vain. Similarly, Europa, a Phoenician princess who becomes mother to Minos of Crete, is abducted by Zeus in a meadow, but here it is the god who disguises himself as a bull in order to interrupt the girl's space with an innocuous appearance. The flower gathering Europa becomes the object of the male gaze, the bullseye, as it were, within this interrupted girl exclusive space. In one version, Bull Zeus breathes a crocus flower from his mouth, krakon epne, to gain Europa's attention before carrying her over the sea to Crete, where he mingled with her. The yellow saffron or crocus proves to be a flower that girls find appealing for its appearance. The crocus is also a flower from which a dye was made for a girl's kitoniskos, which is a small tunic, called a krokitos, and was worn by girls who participated in coming of age rites. Found in this meadow space, the flower thus is doubly a girlish object. Both Europa and Persephone, in their separate stories, each are attracted to this girl-associated flower too before acts of raptus, thereby marking the girlish object and active girl aesthetic consumption as beautiful danger. The configuration of girl enjoyed things in a girl space as dangerous underscores the liminal nature or danger of pre-adolescent girls being in a public space outside of the protection of their paternal head of household or kairos. In the ancient Greek adult male consciousness, a girl is constantly in danger of her girlhood being interrupted by being seen by other men who might endanger her purity or virginity. In the case of the partly secluded meadow girl space, a place removed from the city space, a girl is threatened with being found in its open field, and as is the case for Europa, with being sexually assaulted, or with the unfortunate pun that is found in Greek, such as the word theokoroo, which is literally to utterly end girlhood, but also to deflower, and in English also deflowered. The meadow space is equally a liminal space between safe girlhood active play and danger and involuntary assault. Some, such as Susan Diacy, have dangerously argued for some agency on the part of girls and young women in the meadow, stating that it is a place for girls and young women to be actively erotic of their own volition. To read girl participation in the meadow as actively sexual presents the danger of sexualizing child figures, though, who are simply playing. To read sexuality into girl characters who describe their own acts in the meadow space as playing with flowers and girlfriends, as shall be explained in the Girl Speak section, imposes a non-applicable precociousness on these children. It ignores the fact that these child figures do not consent to these male adult acts of raptus, despite their attraction to the intruding objects which gain their attention. Europa and Persephone, rather, are drawn by childlike curiosity towards pretty objects that they then exert their manipular power over and objectify as their own toys. And with that, we turn to Girl Toy, Persephone's manipular play, and the narcissist Crocus. That the toy is an object that falls into the girl space is supplied by the narrator at the poem's opening. Moreover, the narrator indicates that Persephone and the nymphs playing in the meadow are specifically engaging with the space in a childlike way, not an erotic way, with the verb paito, which from Homer forward properly means play like a child, sport. More broadly afterwards, it means to play, sport, jest, with specific meanings of giving way to hilarity, such as dancing, joking, singing, and also hunt, pursue, game. The verb's base meaning, play like a child, reflects its etymological relation to the noun for child, pais. And here, because it is being used of a child, namely Persephone, undoubtedly the action of the child subject is one of play. The symbolic sexuality that is layered into girls' actions is again an adult male scopophilic and or outside perspective, that of the intruders into the girl space, that scholarship seems to have reapplied to the reading of child action. Based on the text itself, the child action and headspace, and headspace are centered on play. Play, as narrated in the poem's opening, is a childish mode of behavior which is connected to children's intellectual inferiority. And with that, you can see part one on the handout, this text, which we won't read. So the narrator themselves presents two perspectives surrounding the narcissist. One is that of the sphere of the adult realm, ruled by overarching male authority, Zeus and Hades with compliant adult woman Gaia, the earth goddess. The second is that of Persephone, whose girl gaze sees the flower not as the trick that it is, but as a toy. Persephone projects her child view onto the surrounding world and attempts to exact her manipular abilities in order to make it an object of her play. This manipulation, in the sense of exacting literal manipular power and objectification by children, is present in children's literature today, such as in Harold and the Purple Crayon, where Harold, of course, a toddler in age and likely in either an imaginative or a dreamscape, is especially resourceful and creative in an unrealistic setting and is using a tool from real life playtime to create a fantastic world. In the hymn, the child and adult perspectives are juxtaposed in equal measure. The girl's perspective frames the text about the toy flower. In between are the narrations of Zeus, Hades, Gaia plot, and all nature's reaction to the marvelous flower. One perspective, child versus adult, is not necessarily any less real than the other, and the adult sphere knows this. Zeus, Hades, and Gaia, in other words, know that to the girl's mind, this object is a toy, not a trick. The narrator's separation and juxtaposition of the two perspectives reveal to the audience a difference in the psychology of the child and of the adult realms. Though both are real, one dominates the other and manipulates the child's view of reality, or rather their ability to manipulate reality. Ivy Shoesboy explains that children navigate reality by manipulating existing frames with imaginative play mode. The narcissist in play mode is a toy that looks like other girl toys, perhaps even a better version of those toys. And this is the reality that the toy, not truly natural as Persephone supposed by stealth manufacturing, presents as created by adults. Toys present to children the promise of being something that they can objectify or extend their imaginative and manipulative control over, although most toys created by adults are made in a way that shapes and guides a child's thinking. The flower from the adult perspective is a tool to draw Persephone into marriage with Hades, to have her pluck herself into Hades' hands despite being unwilling to go with him. Persephone's narcissist entrances her, as a narcotic does, into concentrated play, albeit the play is corrupted by the abrupt end to girlhood that the tricky toy induces. The narcissist is then as much a bridal object as it is a toy. Nonetheless, the flower takes on the former identity in the reality that is set up by male adults. The adult sphere run by men, as symbolized by H2D, thus demands girls to be pulled into exogamic marriage without their true consent. The glamour of girlhood and the enchantment of bridal things are construed by the narrator as sinister objects of adult mask dominance over the girl sphere that are literally only made to look pretty, hence nature's and Persephone's joy-filled reactions to the flower. Moreover, beauty here is artificial. The artificiality of the flower's prettiness, for instance, immediately falls out of the narrative as soon as the girl grabs the flower and Hades comes and snatches her. The toy trick reveals how the macrocosm of girl world and its enchanting, ethereal, picturesque mode is illusory because it is so easily disrupted by the overarching adult male sphere, which surrounds and exerts its own control over it. Lastly, we turn to girl speak, girl perspectives, and trauma in Persephone's speech. The fact that girl world is interrupted by the adult male and femme sphere also disallows for the presentation of the main girl character speech until the end of the poem. The adult narration of the poem in its opening does not directly report the speech of Persephone, but rather provides words that describe her vocalization in protest to her being snatched by Hades. Persephone's laments and cries go unheard by everyone except by Hecate and Helios. Nothing is said by the narrator of the other girls present in the meadow. Girl speak in the beginning of the poem, therefore, is treated as narrative ornament, one that is contained within the narrator's scenario to present a certain mood to their audience, pity and objection, but that lacks any effective force upon the surrounding characters, save for the two deities, Hecate and Helios, and then Demeter herself, who would drive the hymn's plot further. Girl speak does not dissolve into the adult speaker's narration, though. The audience receives more of the girl's own perspective when Persephone finally speaks in direct quotation for the first time over 400 lines later, which you'll find a handout too. Her first time directly speaking is in response to her mother once she has finally found her. Persephone's narration of the scene of girl play is much more detailed than the adult narrators. Whereas the narrator only describes Persephone's girlfriends and playmates by their paternal relation, Persephone names these girls and others all individually by their primary names in the manner of a catalog. This is one aspect of the girl perspective, a point of view which shows the child's own priorities and interests. Persephone finds it significant, in this case, to list the names of all her friends, while the adult narrator skims over these details to set up their generic scene of young girls playing in an idyllic girl space. The adult narrator's perspective suggests a mundanity of girl play. Meanwhile, Persephone's girlish point of view places more importance to the occasion in its entirety, beyond the event of Raptus itself, by going through each of the details. Her thoroughness also signals her childlike obedience to her mother, as she promises to tell her mother all the things that happened that fateful day of her abduction truthfully, and then reasserts her honesty at the end of her speech. Persephone's speech also intertwines the pleasure of play with the trauma of her experience. The girl highlights the girlish fad favorite flower, the crocus, both first and last in lists of flowers that she and her friends pick. She specifically describes them as soft, which explains her own reason for enjoying the pleasurable plant. The pleasurable plant which she would choose as her toy. The range of flowers that she mentions is generally comparable to that of the opening adult narrator's list: roses, irises, hyacinth, crocuses, and the narcissus that appears like a crocus. The narrator adds violets and then details the tricky narcissus as a flower that Gaia grew for the blush-faced girl, a glittering wonder with 100 blossoms, and its scent smelled very sweet. Persephone, on the other hand, understanding that she was tricked, and the mechanism of the trick, gives a briefer and less beautified description of the narcissus, which she lists last after the other species of flower, saying, and then the narcissus, which the broad earth shot up as though it were a crocus. Persephone's short summary of the flower, with no reference to the prettiness that attracted her, seems to point to the trauma she experienced surrounding and because of it. Additionally, directly following this description is a disclaimer that Persephone adds as an interruption to her narration with the jarring conjunction autar. But I picked it up for fun, which almost appears to be an excuse to her mother, as if to say, I didn't know it would turn out like this, I was only having fun. She ends her speech by explaining that her account has been truthful and full of detail, despite the fact that she is traumatized or aggrieved, thus once again giving voice to her traumatic experience while bargaining with her mother Demeter. Persephone, a child speaker, thus shows some apprehension in explaining the abduction to her mother, as though she has to make sure her mother knows that none of the situation was her own fault. The adult narrator, contrastingly, highlights the girl's ensnaring by her attention to the flower's fleeting prettiness, the implication being that the girl's playfulness, her folly in delighting in silly little pretty things, is what caused her to be abducted. The near victim-blaming tone of the opening narrator is almost in narratological contest with the girl's child perspective, though Persephone in her own right wins by her mother's compliance in staying her anger and simply embracing her daughter. Even though the adult narrator finds fault with girlish mundane play, the girl speaker reestablishes her right to girl play by stating that picking up flowers for fun puts her in the right. Persephone's claim to her play offers pushback against the idea that girlish fun in girl space is at all to blame for adult male cruelty against girls, that girl play in that pleasant, mundane space of the meadow is to be problematized by outside viewers, particularly adult ones. The side-by-side comparison of girl speak and the child voice against overarching adult narration, in addition to the account of girl space and girl toys, one finds in the Homerican to Demeter a justifying apology or even a reassertion of the girl's ability to play in the common public space of the meadow without having to be responsible for the decisions of male adults who act with no regard toward the experience and feelings of the girl herself. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Just keeping an eye on time. Hi, sorry, I don't know what happened there. Okay, we can move on to Ayantika.
Yeah. Hi, I'll just go and share my screen. Yeah, I hope that's okay.
Yep.
Cool. So today I'm going to be talking about Vishal Bharadwaj's 2002 film titled Makri. And Makri is actually a film that should never have seen the light of the day because the CFSI, which is the Children's Film Society of India, were scathing in the shocking dismissal of their film. They wanted Bharadwaj to actually edit out 30 of the 1 hour 30-minute film, stating that it isn't suitable for children. But however, 22 years on, the film has achieved somewhat of a cult status among the Indian audience. And in most online reviews that you find of Makri, the viewers who watched it first children and maybe revisited the film as adults um, write about one good thing that brought them back to watching the film, rewatching the film. And it is that Makri is one of the few Indian films that does not treat the Indian audience or the Indian children, who was the target audience, as people who were, dumb or stupid and weren't able to take their own decisions. So, what happens in case of didactic children's films is that you have a very good versus evil binary, and there's no ambivalence in the morality of the film world, and the ending is usually a good versus evil where good wins over evil. But Makri is not such a story, and that is why I think it was revisited again and again by so many people. These are the few posters of Makri that it was marketed with. So it was marketed by the name The Web of the Witch in the West. And it tells the story of two twin sisters, as you can see here, Chunni and Munni. So Chunni is the brave one. Chunni is the one who, disobeys adults, and Munni is very scared. She is a girl, the typical good girl. She does all her homework. Is that in the village that they live in, there is a rumor that there is a mansion that's haunted, and there's a witch who lives in the mansion who abducts children, and those who enter the mansion never come out alive. So these are some of the contrasting theories that the villagers have regarding the witch. This is Kalua, who is an important character. He's the local butcher. This is the master G, who is the teacher of the village, who is the only voice of reason in the village, who says, I don't believe ghosts or witches exist. And these are some local villagers who say things like, whoever enters the mansion never comes out or comes out as an animal. Now, what happens is Chunni releases Kallu's chickens. She lets them loose, and Kallu goes to chase Chunni for doing that. And he mistakes Munni for Chunni, which is the twin and the good twin, so to speak. And she, while trying to escape Allu, runs into the witch's mansion. And this is Chunni and Munni. So Munni is sort of the scared girl, Chunni is the defiant one. And then Chunni feels terrible that she has played a part in her sister's abduction. So she actually goes to the witch, which is Shabana Azmi here, and requests her to let Munni go. But Shabana, playing the witch or Makri, says that you have to bring me 100 chickens. Only then I will release your sister. She strikes this deal. She tries to continue and provide, chickens to this witch lady. However, later she realizes that she is a con woman because she has been looking for a treasure in this mansion. She's looking for a statue which is worth a few crore dollars, it's said. And that is why she abducts children and uses them for free labor. Now I'll return to the character of Chunni because she's the one who embodies play as resistance in this film. So Chunni is not a typical good girl. She's mischievous, her sister for being a stickler for rules, and she lies a lot. She's best friends with the butcher's son, Mughal Azam. He's named Mughal Azam comically after the great Mughal Akbar. And the first time we see Chunni on screen is actually very interesting Um, there's been a boy who has run into the witch's mansion, and all the adults outside are debating whether they should go in and rescue this boy, but nobody is going in. And we see Chunni, we hear Chunni's voice, which says, I will go in. And then she leads the way, where a group of scared men tiptoe into the mansion behind her. And that is Chunni's defiance of the adult social order. And I read her defiance as through the framework of what we call everyday resistance, where she undermines power and domination through routine and everyday actions. Unlike open rebellions or demonstrations, her rebellions are somewhat hidden. Often her twin sister is the only one who knows of her rebellion. However, it is not politically articulated, it is ingenious. And these acts could be dismissed as just actions of an unruly girl child, but given the famous deep-rooted patriarchal customs, child marriage, female infanticide, I believe that there is potential to read such behavior as an active act of resistance. The film also very funnily uses the trope of the chicken. So the chicken is very important to the film, and the chicken pose is a stress pose. So you go and you mimic the pose of a chicken laying an egg, and it's used in educational institutions as an informal punishment. So when Chunni hasn't done her homework, her teacher tells her, go to the corner and become a chicken. So she says, I'm sorry, I can't be a chicken, but I can be a hen if you want me to. So even though it's a light-hearted comeback, I think it's a very important one because it sheds light on how in Indian language, the male is always assumed as the standard. I mean, not just Indian languages, even in Western languages, I'm sure. But for example, in Bengali, which is my mother tongue, the word childhood literally translates to chele bala, which means boyhood. So there is, the assumption that boyhood is equal to childhood. So Chunni, while she comes back with funny retorts, it's also actually a playful resistance in her classroom, which I think signals a possible space for agency and freedom for the contemporary Indian girl. I'll also quickly talk about Shabana Azmi's figure of the witch, which is drawn heavily from European folklore. Bharadwaj is inspired by the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of the Oz. She plays a traditional witch. She controls animals. She's prone to kidnapping children for free labor. And even though Bharadwaj presents the Western iconography of the witch, because Azmi here wears a long black gown, she has long nails, she has matted hair and greenish blue skin. But in Western iconography, in Western children's literature, you often find the witch as a threat to the stability of the heteronormative and patriarchal Christian societies. But in Bharadwaj's case, Azmi's witch has no such possibility. She just serves as a con woman, as the antithesis of Chunni in the play. Sorry, in the film. And Chunni also around the girl victim versus power binary, which I think is very important because um, this movie shows how realistically such simplistic pigeonholing neglects the daily negotiations of agency that she practices. Because Chunni is a victim in some cases. She's a victim insofar as she is emotionally blackmailed by the witch. She's made to feel guilty for her sister's abduction. But Chunni does show resourcefulness, she shows bravery, she shows spirit of adventure, and this fuels the rescue of her sister. So her characteristics in the film draw heavily from the Victorian adventure novels such as The Coral Island, but Bharadwaj does not use this trope as the trope of a young boy on his way to becoming a model citizen of imperial supremacy, which is how Coral Island uses the trope. He subverts this trope. So Chunni's confrontation with the witch and the subsequent award ceremony. So in the ending of the play, they find out that the witch was a con woman and she is handed over to the authorities. And Chunni and Munya sort of felicitated by the village for for rescuing so many children from her grasp. So when she is felicitated as the heroine of her village, it signals a possible reality where she breaks out of the heteronormative expectations of what it is to be a good girl, and she is celebrated because she has managed to break some rules and stand up for herself and her sister. And here I'll quickly talk about this song, which is the title of my paper as well, which says "O Papar Wale Panga Na Le," and I've attached a English translation of the song. And it says, it's quite playful and fun and mischievous. And a look into the lyrics of the song tells us that Chunni embodies a aspirational, youthful, playful girlhood that has not been represented so much in Indian films. If we go by the statistics, I think realistically also it is not how Indian girls are allowed to have their girlhoods or childhoods, because um, even though the prevalence of child marriage has decreased from 49% in 1993 to 22% in 2021 in India, it still indicates that 1 in 5 girls in India are married before the age of 18. And the literacy rate also tells us that 66% of Indian females are educated. So, going by these statistics, if we go to Chunni's play and mischievous acts of transgression, I think that these can be read as acts of resistance. There have been some um, girls, there have been representations of some playful girls in Indian cinema. These are from Satyajit Ray's films. So, this is Durga from Pathir Pachali, which is also called The Song of the Road, and Mrinmoy from Shomapti. However, these girls, these playful girls, are scolded by their village neighbor because they are always running around like boys, boy-like. Their behavior is termed boy-like. They are stealing fruits from trees. They are climbing trees. They are running around with their untamed, unoiled hair. And there is a desperate attempt to tame these girls. So Durga dies before she can be tamed. She dies of fever before she is 18. But Mrinmoy is tamed, as you can see in this picture where she's looking really sad, dressed as a child bride on the swing, so kind of signaling the end of her childhood. So she has been tamed from a carefree, indomitable girl to a contained, loving wife, and this sometimes signals the end of her childhood. This is also something that is celebrated because she transforms quietly and rightly to the role of a good wife who is going to be cooking, cleaning, and do some embroidery for her free time. However, it's important that in Bhardwaj's film, nothing like this happens because there is no such transition into where she is tamed to be a good girl. In fact, the film ends very much like it begins. The film with us seeing that Chunni has let colors chickens loose and colorized cheese. And in the end, when she is being felicitated for rescuing the children from her, when Kalua sees his chickens running around, Chunni has again let his chickens loose. So, in spite of the trauma that Chunni has suffered due to the abduction of her sister, her playful spirit is indomitable. And I think reading beyond the expression of play simply as um, one that is stemming from childlike innocence, if we read Chunni's play as resistance, we see that Chunni actually paves the way for representations of girlhood in Indian cinema that go beyond the circumscribed patriarchal order to open up space for transgression, for joy, for laughter, for witty banter, and for comedic storytelling as well. So I believe that's my time, and thank you so much.
Oh, that was really amazing. Thank you for that. We can now move on to Shauna. Is that the okay? Great. Go ahead. Shauna, do you mean to be on mute?
Yeah, sorry, coming.
Sorry.
Coming. Okay, hi everybody. There we go. Hello everyone, and thanks so much for listening to my talk today. A huge shout out to the Girlhood Studies Collective for organizing this amazing symposium. It's quite a treat to be here, and it's a delightful way to spend the last 3 days. So I've been thinking about how young people live through war and what their mechanisms of persistence might look like. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to focus on one question that emerged from this consideration, and that is, how do war, girlhood, and play collide to produce assemblages of survival? And it's sort of amazingly tied into most of the talks that we've had in this session. So great organizing on the part, again, of the collective. This question has brought me to 2 autobiographical texts that depict uniquely located historical accounts of girlhood during war. So the first one is Persepolis, the story of a childhood, originally published in French in 2000 and then in English in 2003. Persepolis is a graphic novel written by Marjan Satrapi and is based on her recollections of growing up during the Islamic Revolution and through the Iran-Iraq War in the early 1980s. The second text is Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, originally published in Dutch in 1947 and in English in 1952.
Sean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your slides aren't advancing.
So you don't see this?
We just see your cover slide.
Okay. What do you see now?
Just you. If you want to maybe share screen again and just
Yeah.
see if you can move through the slides on the left, even if the notes are open, just see if it's just that or not.
Okay. Okay. Still not advancing?
Oh, it's with the notes. It's happened as well. We can see more of your notes instead of the slides. Would you like to click end slideshow at the top and then just pan through your slides from the left? Click. Is that convenient?
Yeah, I'm just sort of struggling to end the slideshow here. Hang on.
Mm-hmm.
It, for some weird reason, it's not moving off the screen. I don't want to waste too much time. It's sort of unfortunate. Let's see. Slideshow. Okay, so I've ended the show.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to see my slides now?
No, we can just see you. So you can try share screen again, open the PowerPoint, and just click through the slides as they are in PowerPoint. This happened with me as well the last time. Maybe that just helps with showing the slides without the notes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, great.
Okay.
Would you be comfortable just clicking through the slides on the left and then?
You bet.
Right.
Okay. All right.
That's as big as it can go. Yeah.
Okay. Clicking away. Good thing I have prepared. Okay. So, yeah, and Anne Frank, which was published in Dutch in 1947 and in English in 1952. The diary is written by Anne as a Jewish teenage girl hiding in a Dutch attic from 1942 to 1944 during the Holocaust. Like girlhood, play is usually dismissed as frivolous and trivial, understood in opposition to the seriousness of adult work. Play is often diminished as childish. I'll define play quite broadly as any activity that provides enjoyment and offers the sensation of a temporally suspended state. But for Anne and Margie, play is also a life force where human and non-human entities intersect to create effective networks that make war survivable. Anne and Margie engage in a type of play that in girlhood studies terms might be called teen girl culture. Through teen girl play, Anne and Margie participate in the creation of worldings that encompass people, time, space, and things, or what I have elsewhere explored as a girlhood embedded in and contingent on networks of social and material cultures. For Anne, the serious play of diary writing is a life force that participates in her survival. Her diary, a red plaid book given to her on her 13th birthday, just a few weeks before her family is forced into hiding, is her trusted companion for 2 years. Named Kitty and personified as a dear friend, Anne's diary is an enlivened force in which she pours her dreams, daily routines, and musings. But unlike the dramatic circumstances that cause her family to go into hiding, Anne's diary is filled with mundane chores and events that belie the danger she is in as a Jew who may at any moment be sent to the gas chamber. I travel through these ghostly pages with Anne, who I know is already dead, and I open the orange-yellow cover to watch her peel potatoes, wash floors, get her period. She has her first kiss. I see her complain about her mother, and I see her pass each hour, day, month, and year with the kind of intellectual determination that allows her to maintain her survival. For Margie, the seriousness of play is related to her rebellious engagement with Western popular culture, especially music and fashion, which is a life force for her. She pursues these passions despite possible imprisonment in the years following 1980. Now that the Islamic Revolution in Iran has forbidden girls to show their hair and to act in any way deemed decadent and Western, Margie wears things like Nike shoes, buys forbidden music, and smokes cigarettes as an act of rebellion. I travel through the comical yet brutally honest black and white illustrations hidden beneath a bright red cover with Margie as she witnesses her country's transformation under the new regime, as she eavesdrops on her parents' conversations about the torture of loved ones, and as she screams into her pillow, desperate for the space to rebel safely. These are two very different coming-of-age narratives and coming to political consciousness stories. Yet I am similarly drawn to them because they radiate intensity in their sad beauty, because they are about war, which has preoccupied me, and because they are about teenage girls who endure extraordinary circumstances. What these narratives demonstrate is that war, girlhood, and play exist as contingencies of each other, forging a mutual dependence that creates an assemblage or constantly shifting network of affecting forces. Play is thus neither childish nor inconsequential in these narratives, but how hope materializes. Margie struggles to grasp hope as she witnesses the collapse of a beloved society and the rise of fundamentalism, where opportunities for girls and women are suddenly constrained. And in this example on the slide, you can see her lamenting her lost possible future of becoming the next Marie Curie, because Iranian universities will have to close for 2 years to cleanse themselves of Western ideology. Conversely, Anne's diary is filled with hope for a future that I know never materializes. She writes on June 6, 1944, just 3 days before she is arrested, "Where there's hope, there's life. It fills us with fresh courage and makes us strong again." Anne's hope floats her through the 2-year confinement, causing her to believe that she will survive to publish her diary one day. To theorize these assemblages of survival, I draw an affect theory through the lineage of Spinoza. I take up feminist anthropologist Kathleen Stewart's usage of this lineage in her book, Ordinary Affects. Stewart's argument is simple, that we simply pay attention to the affective dimensions of everyday life and the potential that animates the ordinary. Stewart begins with the disparate, fragmented, and seemingly inconsequential experiences of everyday life to bring attention to the ordinary as an integral site of cultural politics. Theorized in this way, affect is a radical intersectionality where human and non-human elements collide to create something new. In this immanent sense, affects are not conscious feelings or psychoanalytic attachments. Instead, this type of affect is what happens within relations of proximity among people, objects, temporalities, locations, and events, as they are felt beneath the surface of consciousness. Behind a bookshelf that hides the staircase to the secret annex, Anne sits at a tiny desk and writes. For 2 years, Anne shares her thoughts with Kitty as a practice of survival. As she expresses her insights daily, she grows more certain of a future that I know never arrives. Toward the end of the diary on May 5, 1944, Anne explains that she has bright prospects where she is alive and writing. When I write, I can shake off all my cares, she says. My sorrow disappears. My spirits are revived. But, and that's a big question, will I ever be able to write something great? Will I ever become a journalist or a writer? I hope so. Oh, I hope so very much. So onward and upward, it'll all work out because I'm determined to write. As Anne and her diary intersect, hope materializes as futurity. Anne writes of a future in which, once freed from the secret annex, she may be able to go outside again, or she becomes a famous writer or a journalist. She's always focused on the future. When this is over, when I have children, when I'm able to walk in the sun once again. As Anne writes to Kitty, she writes herself alive in a future where Jews are treated as human, and her writing makes a difference in the world. Anne's focus on the future is felt in her entries about growing up and falling in love, but also in her effort to learn new things. She studies constantly. And as a reader, I kept asking myself why she is doing this during the war. She is, of course, told to by her parents, but ultimately, I think it's because she envisions a tomorrow where this knowledge will actually matter to her. She is quite firmly convinced that she will survive. Yet hope, like everything else in an assemblage, is not constant. It transforms through ordinary circuits of intensity, rises and falls, is both sustained and diminished. As Anne writes on November 8, 1943, I simply can't imagine the world will ever be normal again for us. I do talk about after the war, but it's as if I was talking about a castle in the sky. But the diary's effective force keeps Anne from straying too far into pessimism. As she notes on December 24, 1943, well, that's enough of that. My writing has raised me somewhat from the depths of despair. While an assemblage of survival encompassing the Holocaust, Anne in a diary generates hope in the form of futurity, Marjane Satrapi's younger wartime self, Margie, does not look to the future. Instead, Margie lives only in the present moment. Her carpe diem engagement with teen girl culture is how hope materializes in Persepolis. Margie doesn't think about the consequences of her actions as she goes for a walk in her Nike shoes and denim jacket bought for her by her parents and smuggled back into Tehran from Turkey. She surrounds herself with material girl culture, including all the things you see on this slide. This precise moment of joy depicted on the panel where Margie prepares to go out alone promises immediate freedom for a few hours as a scarved and jean-jacketed Iranian teen girl with a purpose. Her purpose, of course, is only to procure more teen girl culture. Yet, this moment of joy is punctured when she is caught by the women's branch of the Guardians of the Revolution. After procuring contraband cassette tapes, Margie is stopped by this paramilitary group and asked why she is dressed in decadent Western clothing. She's told to get into the car, and at this point, Margie panics. She realizes that she is now in danger. And as you can see in this slide and on the quote, they can do anything to her at this point. They have ultimate power. She begins to cry and begs to be let go, and somehow it works. She is released from questioning. Back home, Margie tries to shake off this terrifying experience by blasting Kim Wilde's hit, "We're the kids in America, whoa." Sorry. I can't read the words without singing it. It's impossible. As Satrapi writes, to each his own way of calming down. So it is here in the last cell of the panel that hope regenerates. Margie dances and sings loudly, and a sense of power and anger return to her, not just aimed at the state, but also aimed at, of course, her teen girl life. In this final example, Margie's rebellion is acted out on two fronts, demonstrated through her resistance to the state and her mother, because of course this is a coming of age narrative after all. To demonstrate her resistance, she smokes a cigarette. And in that smoking, she says, "With this first cigarette, I kissed childhood goodbye. Now I was a grown-up." This is a very famous passage from the comic book. Embedded in an assemblage of survival where hope emerges as rebellious smoking or dancing or walking alone on the street. Margie lives moment to moment without much thought of the future. I'm almost finished, and I know I took time up just getting my slides settled. I just need like 2 minutes. Unlike Anne, Margie cares only for the now, because if she thinks of the past or the future, the now will become bloodied with pain, fear, and death. What Margie does not foresee, because it is future-oriented, is that in her rebellious nature, her parents become so concerned about her life that they send her away to Vienna in order to protect her from potential imprisonment and punishment. So just to conclude, the ordinary affects generated through the assemblage of survival in which Anne and Margie are enmeshed offer new and I think meaningful ways to understand how girlhood, war, and play intersect to produce hope. And I have some other stuff here that I'm going to skip over in the interest of time. The ordinariness of teen girl culture becomes rarefied in the crucible of war. At the same time as these mundane items emit hope, they also maintain the very ordinariness that makes them felt as part of the everyday. These girlhoods of war are shaped by such ordinary affects, which matter precisely because they contain a potentiality and resonance so often obscured by their presumed girlish simplicity. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for all of those presentations. I'm just keeping an eye on time. The next session is starting 11:48 ET. I'm just trying to calculate it here, so it's got barely about 10 minutes. If anyone, I'm going to ask, there's one question in the chat. I'm going to ask Alex if you would like to read that out quickly so that it's for Sienna so she can feel that. I think we're going to have to run through a few questions, so feel free to just like pick up and do that, or whether you want to do it over chat or speech. Go for it.
Sure, I can read it out loud. So, Sienna, you mentioned interpretations of this poem where Persephone's play in the meadow is seen as her own act of sexual awakening, which is an interpretation you had disagreed with. So, aside from the reasons that you mentioned, do you believe that this interpretation erases any important aspects of, from the actual text of the poem itself?
Yeah, thank you. So quickly, well, one of the main things that it does is it ignores entirely the fact that in Persephone's own narration of her story that she says that she's playing, and that in no way does she sexualize her own actions. And this is, of course, deeply embedded in some things that I had to leave out of the presentation, that the act of flower picking in itself is seen as something that is sexual because it is so related to the goddess of eroticism and beauty herself, Aphrodite, and that flowers are considered the things of Aphrodite. But so that's where some of the argument for agency comes from. But once again, the issue is we're ignoring the girl's voice when we apply this reading that it is an act of, or that Persephone's play is an act of eroticism or sexual awakening on her own part.
Anyone else would like to jump in, ask anything, comments, questions? Just gonna check if there are any hands. I forget that's a thing as well, no? Yeah, I mean, I guess themes at all. I just want to thank you for such a incredible. I'm still like basking in all of the information. Really, really fantastic presentations by everyone here. Thank you so much. I'm going to be very honest. The Makti presentation, I was just having like flashbacks to my childhood. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after watching Makri, so it's been nice to come back to it with this perspective. And thank you so much for these interesting explorations into films, poetry, whatever. I think I'm gonna propose wrapping it up here. We're starting the next session very quickly. And if you have any more questions, please just send it over to our conference hosts. I'm sure they're gonna like look into that and pass it on. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for presenting, and thank you so much for this conference as well, Haley. And oh my God, I forgot I've not got your first name. I can only see Feynman. Is that how you say it?
Yep, my full name is E.
E.
Yep.
Thank you, E and Haley.